everybody, and happy Friday to you. Here in Wichita, it's actually really rainy and gloomy outside, which is probably why it looks dark in here because I only have like two little lamps that are lighting this video right now. But I wanted to touch base with y'all and talk about how childhood trauma that isn't resolved or healed can manifest in adulthood. I think oftentimes people don't connect the dots that maybe they've had childhood trauma for a lot of different reasons. And honestly, our brains are kind of wired sometimes to protect us from thinking that we've had trauma or thinking we've had things happen to us in the past. And so a good portion of my clients, it's been really interesting for me to see how they come in and originally they don't think they've had childhood trauma or any sort of traumas that might be impacting their view or their behaviors in the world now. And as we go through the course of therapy, they start to unravel different things, whether it was childhood trauma or relationship trauma, that did actually have an impact on their view of the world and their view of themselves, and then inevitably their behaviors and how they are living in the world. And so I just wanted to talk about a few things I see in people that are typically some red flags that you may have unresolved trauma from childhood or from other relationships in your lives, and just something for you to be aware of if you see it in other people too, to have grace for them. Because again, I do think that people who struggle with things, they're not intending to struggle. They didn't wake up that morning thinking, hey, I'm going to hurt people with my struggles, but often they come from a hurt place. And so if we can have empathy and grace for them, that is important too. So here's some of the red flags that you may want to look out for. A big one is a tendency to want to fix others. So people who have unresolved childhood trauma, sometimes they were so used to trying to fix or control or manage their environment if there was a lot of chaos, or if one of the parents weren't around, or maybe they weren't emotionally around, they may have taken on this role of really trying to fix and make sure everything's taken care of. And they do that as well in their adult relationships, which can also manifest as people pleasing. I've often found that my clients that really struggle with people pleasing almost have this lens of the world where instead of seeing it through their own eyes and through their own wants and desires, they see it through this lens of what would this person want or desire. And the funny part is obviously we can't read people's minds, so half the time they're kind of guessing what other people want or desire, and that can lead to issues itself. But that's kind of their lens, is like always trying to guess or predict what other people want or desire out there in the world. And so they have this like disconnection with themselves and their own desires and their own values. And often, the developing that type of view of the world can stem from childhood trauma or relationship trauma. Also, if you find that you're really needing external validation, right, which can kind of be what people get out of people pleasing, is that they often get kudos or rewards for pleasing others because they feel like they need that. They feel like they need someone to tell them that they're okay and that they're doing a good job. And so if you find that you're very much motivated by external validation, there may be something to look into there. Another cue is living on high alert. So it's interesting because I've seen this manifest where it's not like people necessarily recognize that they're on high alert, but it's more so that they'll say things like, I feel like life is always crazy or chaotic or stressful, which really is because their brain is always on high alert and kind of picking up on stressors or even perceived stressors in the environment that don't even exist, where they can make a mountain out of a molehill. And again, because you're in your own brain, you may not see that you're making it a mountain when it's a molehill, but it may feel more like life just being overwhelming, but constantly overwhelming, not just because of a situation, but just this constant feeling of overwhelm and stress and busyness. So if you feel that, or if you do actually connect the dots and see that you live life on high alert, that may be a cue that you have some unresolved childhood trauma. Another tell for that would be your body. So even for myself, like I've had to do some healing of body trauma that I've had because, if I hear a noise, I see other people in the environment and they may not respond to it, but my body will jump or be jumpy around certain things. So if you do that consistently, it's definitely something worth looking into because we can heal that body trauma as well. Another sign of unhealed childhood trauma would be the fear of abandonment. And that can just look like really reading into certain situations and perceiving if somebody's going to leave you or reject you at a rate that isn't typical. So if you find that in relationships, you're always fearful that they may leave you or that your mind goes to the worst case scenario if they do something like stay out with their friends too late or if they just do certain things and if your mind tends to go to, are they going to leave me? Are they doing something against me? That might be a fear of abandonment issue that can be resolved with therapy and time and work and healing. The other thing is I've also seen people have this like drive to prove themselves. Sometimes it's to prove themselves to others, but often it's actually like this idea that they have to prove something to themselves. And the funny part is when I ask them like, hey, like what's good enough? When are you going to be like, all right, I've proved this to myself? They typically don't have an answer. So it's this like insatiable drive to prove something to themselves that can never be satiated. And when I see that pattern, it's typically because of some unresolved trauma with relationships or the self. The other thing we'll see is people staying in relationships where they know things are abusive or they know, like, I even had a client the other day that said, I just want to know the answer to this question. And then, 2 minutes later, she's like, I know the answer to that question. Like, I know that they said that they're not going to change, yet there's still this like resistance or roadblock that will keep her in a relationship that she even logically knows she doesn't want to be in. And so it's really interesting because, working through trauma can actually enable people to have the resources they need to leave unhealthy and abusive relationships as well. They may attract narcissistic partners, and they may have a difficulty setting boundaries because they're just so fearful about how people will react. Or even if they don't react, they internally will feel guilty for setting boundaries and like they did something wrong, right? Because they're just so not used to like boundaries and respect of that and may not know their worthiness in that. All right, y'all, I know I just talked a lot at you, but I did want to go through all those different ways that unhealed childhood trauma can manifest. Because again, I think people often think, okay, it had to be this really big T trauma thing that happened to me in childhood, but often it's the little things, it's the subtle things, it's the things that didn't happen that were supposed to, or the things we perceived that happened as a kid because we had an undeveloped child brain. And so, if you find that you engage in these behaviors, you might want to think twice about if you have, unresolved trauma from childhood or previous relationships. Thank you, Devin. I hope you have a good weekend too. All of y'all, I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Thank you for joining me today, and I wish you all well. Do some belly breathing, and I will check in with you on Monday.